Go.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Play Therapy Path. My name is Deja, and I'm joined today by three fabulous people who are also pursuing master's degrees in school counseling, and they are.
Hi, I'm Nancy.
Hi, I'm Sandy.
Hi, I'm Mikey.
And then today, our podcast objectives will discuss the book Dibs in the Search of Self and discuss research supporting the benefits and outcomes of CCPT or child-centered play therapy in elementary schools.
All right. So Dibs, Dib in Search of Self is a book that's based off of a true story. This book was published in 1964 by a clinical psychologist and author Virginia Axline. I do apologize if I say her name wrong. So in the book, Dibs in Search of Self, it's about a story about a child who is approximately 5 to 6 years old, um, who whose emotional and cognitive behavior made others perceived them as mentally retarded or emotionally disturbed. And those are actually the exact words that are used in the book. So no one knew exactly what his diagnosis was, because he has been taken to doctors, psychologists, um, and he's been through a lot of assessments, which showed that there was nothing really wrong with him. And so through a series of play session, it revealed that he has unfulfilled needs in his early childhood, um, that really made him shut out the world and kind of developed his own sense of independency, but also not independent as he was able to do things for himself, but independent as he didn't want to socialize with other people. He didn't connect with other people. And the only person he can rely on was himself. So with that, through a series of play session and a safe environment, Dibs was able to reveal how gifted he was beyond his age and how to be himself again. So we are going to discuss Dibs prior to play therapy. Um, and all of the information are information that you can read from the book itself. But here are some of the qualities or words that were mentioned in the book to describe Dibs. So, according to the book, Dibs never screamed, he never cried when he came to school. But when he had to leave, he would refuse to leave and he would scream, kick, scratch, bite, and he would even say, "No, go home." So, um, that was his way of refusing to go home. When he did arrive at school, though, again, he it seemed like he was excited to come to school, but he just didn't know how to socialize with others, because he'll just stand at the door and wait until someone comes to lead him inside. So at school, he didn't talk. He never ventured off. He would just sit there, not talk in silence and not go anywhere. When he was approached by others, he would huddle up into a ball and just not move. So it sounds like he was trying to just protect himself. He never looked anyone directly in the eye. He never answered to anyone. He never took things directly from anyone. And so, for example, if a teacher wanted to give him a book, he would not take it from her. He would wait until she placed it down on the table and then he would go and get the book. He had tantrums sometimes. And so in the book, it mentioned how he would just kind of crawl around the edge of the room and kind of hide under tables. But one thing that he really did enjoy, according to the book, was just looking at books. So he was able to look at books forever. And he would look at books as if he was actually reading the books. And so that was one thing that for sure um, stood out to his teachers and the play therapist or the child psychologist herself. So with that, what do you guys think about Dibs prior to play therapy? And when you read the book and it described his behavior in the classroom, what were some things that were coming up?
For me, when I was reading the book and I was reading how he was acting prior to play therapy in the classroom, it was making me feel a little sad because I work with kids right now and like engage in their play a little bit, but also watch them. And just seeing how much a kid is able to like express themselves in the classroom through learning, playing and stuff, it was kind of sad to hear that Dibs is so like closed off and like not engaging with other kids or even his teacher in the classroom, and also like basically feel like he's like alone and has no one to interact with.
I feel very similar. For me, what stood out the most is like just thinking back on when like I was like around that age, like they always label children like this as like the troubled kid or like the troublemaker. And before like you wouldn't think much of it, but now that after reading this book, I thought to myself, like, like what did they need? Like they weren't just like doing stuff just to be bad or anything. Like it just makes me think like how could have things been different with those children if it was approached different, like it was described like in this book. Just it really made me think of like past things and just like how to kind of approach things now, just because it's like almost like a second lens and like how children act. They're not just doing it just to be like troublemakers. Like there's always like a story behind like what a child does.
Yeah, this was definitely a challenging read. At points, it also reminded me. I'm trying to remember the name of the book. Almost like net. I think it was called "A Child Called It," but it also did make me reflect too. I did have students when I was a music director that there were quite a few kids that used like music as their self-expression, and they loved it coming to school. And then after our rehearsal, they would be depressed, not because the rehearsal was over, but because they had to go home. And I started reflecting on that, like, why don't they want to go home? And this book kind of made me relive that because a lot of students I would discuss this with, they didn't have uh, a good place to go home. Like they felt that school was like their safe space and all that. Um, it really does, it did hit on a personal level just from my experiences. It did make me sad reading the book. I actually did find it quite challenging, but I would still recommend this to anyone who's wanting to work in education, especially with children. This was definitely a eye-opening experience of a book.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, what was the most shocking was that the school didn't create a safe environment for him to open up as well. And I completely understand that he was so traumatized at such an early age, um, and that it was going to take a lot of work. But I was really angry at the teachers for almost like not creating a safe enough space for him. And um, I remember in the book there was only one teacher that really tried to work with him. Okay. So, one thing that I also wanted to talk about is what was revealed in the play session. So, the first thing that I want to talk about was the locked doors. Right off the bat, from the first session, with Dr. Axline or Virginia Axline, was that Dibbs did not like locked doors. He did not like closed doors, and he did not like walls all around him. And so when he would be playing with the house that is in the playroom, he would knock down all of the walls. And later it was revealed that his parents would punish him by locking him in his room. And so, what were some things that came up with that?
Um, Reading that again, just a sense of anger would be one of the best things that I personally experience when like hearing about that this just because um you hear about this more often than you would like to hear it. It does show up a lot of times in the news too, that like you constantly hearing about children being locked in inside of their own home, which is supposed to be a safe environment. Whether it be punishment or even the fact that sometimes parents have done this to where they just lock their child in their room thinking that it's good for them and that it's a safe environment, and then the parents actually leave the home to go do what they want. So it does make me upset. And additionally, too, just knowing that I do agree with what you said about teachers, how the teachers, we wish that they approached it differently. And as upset as we can be too, I think it also comes with a lack of education with teachers not knowing about these different types of things, and like catching these things from their students, kind of just brushing it off as just another bad seed, but instead not looking in more depth about that student. So it made me question myself, or not myself, but the world that we live in right now, as well as just it inspires me to want to do better, knowing that we're the next generation of counselors, teachers, educators, and all that stuff. We can make a difference just through learning through from, like, for example, this book.
Yeah, I can second to what Mikey was saying. When I was reading this section of the book, it made me feel like frustrated and angry, but also like like sad. Because I feel like if a teacher or any staff on campus were able to watch him through his play with if he engaged in his play, they would able to notice like different themes that he was representing. And he maybe would have got help sooner. But also it made me mad because like why would the parents do that type of thing? Like there's other ways to like punish your kid, maybe even like trying to talk it out or engage and play themselves. This is why parents should be aware of and knowledgeable about this. But yeah, it made me feel really uncomfortable.
I can definitely agree. This part in the book, uh, it was just like a lot like hearing like people saying like, oh, like it was back in the 50s or 60s, whichever time it was. Like people said like, oh, well, that's how it was. That's how it's like. It's just sad. It's like that's how it was. Like that was like the normal, like how people would like treat their kids or how they would treat students. And it makes me feel good that that's not like that now. But just knowing that like kids went through stuff like that, just it was just a lot. Like it made me feel really sad to know, like even if it's not just like this example, like how many other kids like went through an experience like this. And it makes me want to also, like you all, be a better counselor and be able to notice even like the smallest of things in like children, just so that way they can at least feel like seen or heard. So that way, stuff doesn't build up like this, or like if they feel the way they do like at home, they can feel like different or safer at school. Like just be the best and like positive outlet I can be like as a counselor for like children. Just it was a lot.
Yeah, I agree. I think it definitely was a lot. And like for the people who haven't read this book yet, keep in mind that again, he was 5 and 6 years old when he was going to the play session. So everything that has happened was before. So he was probably 2, 3, 4, we don't know the exact age in which he's experienced doors being locked on him and in a room alone with no one to rely on. And so this kind of brings me up to my next point in the relationship between his parents. So there's a chapter in the book that the mother um has an interview with the psychologist, and the mother actually revealed a lot about um what was happening behind the scenes, in terms of how he was conceived, and how they had a really rough I don't know why I just said that with the D, but a really rough um early childhood. And so um the mother talked about how he was conceived, and it was an accident. They didn't want to have a child, and so since he was conceived, the father was really like he resented the pregnancy. um and so the mother um mentioned how her and her husband were very happy before he was born, and when he was born, that Dibs kind of spoiled their life plans. um she mentioned, in quote, he was so different, so big, and so ugly. And um in a sense, there was rejection from both parties. He rejected her and they rejected him. So since there was rejection going on, they were completely embarrassed of him, um in a sense that they really thought that their own child was, quote unquote, mentally retarded. And so they started cutting off people and kind of um stopped going to social events because they didn't want anyone to see him and they didn't want anyone to know about him. And so it was a really sad chapter to read. Um, but something that was revealed later on was how through child-centered play therapy, um, Dips finally said "I love you" to his mom, and I think that was a very big moment um, in his relationship with his mom. So what did you guys think about that?
I felt before like the stuff where he like said I love you to his mother. I know at first I felt pretty upset hearing what how they would describe Dibs and how they felt like he ruined their life or their future. Just because even though like they didn't want him or they didn't expect to have him, that doesn't mean like he ruined everything for them. They could have still, done what they wanted to do or pursue what they wanted to do. Because I know the mother, I believe she was, I believe she was a doctor or a researcher. I can't remember what her field was before having Dibs.
She was gonna become a surgeon.
There you go, yeah, a
Yeah.
surgeon. And after she had Dibs, she kind of stopped that because they kind like you mentioned that he quote unquote ruined everything. But what really made me mad is they chose to have a daughter, and then they're like, oh, she's perfect, she's amazing, she's like everything we want, but somehow he's the reason like everything's horrible. So that made me really upset. And just like here, but like the one thing is like when she talked with the play therapist and like just really like let everything out and expressed herself. I thought that was a really big moment for her as well, just because like I can't even imagine how much it hurt for her to hold all that in for so long and just be able to express herself and like not want him to like dislike her. Like she wanted, even though she felt that way before, she wants him to like not necessarily be normal, but be able to like, have a like more natural relationship with him. So even though it was really frustrating, I thought it was really like big for her to discuss all she did about Dibs and be able to like let all that out and like express, like how it was from when he was born up until now, like their relationship.
Yeah, just to add on, I also felt similar to Nancy, but I found it empowering how play therapy not only did it help Diz, but it helped his mom process. So I feel like it can apply to not just the child, it can apply to the parents, the teachers, and everyone that's involved in the child's life. And to have them be able to like open their eyes and like express how they feel, but also get a better understanding of where the child's coming from. in their situations.
So there was actually one part of what you had stated, Sandy, where you said that Dibbs had told his mother he loved her, and that actually I might be shooting a little bit forward here, but I actually did bring some research articles to this podcast episode, and one of them that I see a similar theme. I'm specifically looking at an article that is titled "Child-Centered Play Therapist Experiences of Conducting Group Play Therapy." It basically begins. Well, I'm gonna keep it short just for time's sake, but basically, the overall is that a lot of adults typically see children that have like bad behaviors or non-communicative behavior and all that stuff, that there's typically something wrong with them. And then a lot of times too, teachers will look at that and most likely jump towards the fact that maybe the home environment is not stable, is not a good area and all that stuff. But to kind of go where I'm going is there is a lot of research that does show that play therapy does typically help children not only self-express but also does show very observable differences in behavior. For example, in one part of the article research that I'm observing is there is a child named Kate. She was being observed because she was brought in for very aggressive behavior, and her experiences with child-centered play therapy, it was very observable because not only was her in quote unquote temper being more managed by her, but she was also able to express herself more at home. So rather than just speak like aggressively acting out or showing big emotions at home, she was actually able over in a span of about a week or so that um, they were able to explain using their words that I'm upset. I need to take some time to myself and basically just learn how to regulate what she learned in the playroom. So I do believe that kind of like again, just touching up on that point about Dibbs expressing to his mother that he loved her, you can see typical like very observable change through the use of play therapy. I know I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but that was just one thing that really stuck out, and I really felt like I needed to speak on that.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And I think um, you all brought up really good points. When Nancy talked about how it really helped the mom process talking to the play therapist, I think that was a very big turning point in his relationship with his mother. And um, since Dibbs is going to play therapy, it's allowing him to um, really take responsibility for his actions as well. Now I definitely want to switch the focus onto the father. And so um, in the book, um, we don't have an interview with the father. We know that Div's dad, he buried himself in work to kind of avoid spending time with the kids or Dibs in this sake. And he didn't really like when Dibs would talk a lot, or he didn't like when Dibs would have big feelings. And so some things that he would say to Dibs is, um, you're babbling like an idiot, or you're stupid. And so um, with that relationship that he has with Dibs, we come to realize that in the book, Dibs would bury his father in the sand. So not his little father, but a toy that represents his father, and that toy would be buried under the sand, and that toy would be locked inside the house, locked inside the room, um, and so there was a play session in which Dibs locked toys that represent his mother and father inside the house, and then he turned it to a bear. And when the house caught on fire, he went back to save them. And so I think that was, in a sense, also him returning or recognizing his responsibilities as well. So did you all have any thoughts when you were reading this portion of the book?
So yes, it very relatable experience. A lot of times too, parents do parents can get very overwhelmed in work. It's a very understandable thing, especially when trying to like put food on the table or make sure that the children have what they have. But it's also important too to realize that just as important as being present in someone's life, not being present actually has, if not the same exact type of force or the same exact type of feeling from just not being there. The fact that Dibbs buried his father in his sand, I thought that was a great symbolization of just saying that you're not around, and when you are around, you find a way to not be there. Um, uh, yeah, and then also just saying that locking mother and father inside the house. Um, all great, all great representations of self-expression. I'm actually very happy that we got to learn about that, because I think that's something, again, highlighting that if you see that, you should really take note of that. Not necessarily asking questions, but there's some significance to what that can mean. So, um, yeah, I thought that was one of the best examples of expressing uh, of Dibs expressing themselves in the book, especially about the father not being there.
I definitely agree on that. I like saw like, play isn't just like just playing with toys and that's it. This was like a really good example of like how like themes can come up and just like how their relationships can show through like just like the little things that children do while at the play session. So like although like it was sad like to see like how he showed that his father was towards him, it was very impactful like to see how like just like small little things like in the playroom can represent so much to the child.
Yeah, and this example just basically shows how like play is basically this child way of communicating how what thoughts they have in their mind. If they're not able to express it through words, their play is there for them to easily or express themselves.
Yeah. So overall, we kind of talked about like the book and summarizing certain parts that stood out to us. And I definitely recommend anyone who's listening to read the book, because there's just so much more that we didn't get a chance to talk about. Um, Now, I definitely want to share a quote that was from the book, and I feel like really this really depicted how much child-centered play therapy, in a sense, not like not only help Dibs, but help the parents take a look at their relationship with him as well. Um, so earlier I mentioned how he had been taken to see a psychiatrist to do assessments, and um, the psychiatrist actually told Dib's mother, and now this is me quoting Dib's mother from the book. He said that Dibs was not mentally defected or psychotic or brain damaged, but the most rejected and emotionally deprived child he had ever seen. He said that my husband and I were the ones who needed help. And so, um, to me, it kind of just showed that sometimes we definitely do need to take a step back and look at, um, as parents, as adults, what we're bringing to this relationship that we have with a child. And so, did you all feel some type of way, or did this kind of get any of your guys's brains rolling just because it was so powerful, I would say.
I thought it was really intense seeing the part that said like that her and the husband were the ones who needed help. But it was very intense to where like it was almost like an eye opener for them because they were so fixed on like they were in the right and Zibs was the one who needed to change or he was wrong. So like for them to hear that, I feel like it was very, even though like we can't like say like yes they need help or no they don't need help, but like it was very important for them to hear them like hear someone else tell them like there's nothing wrong with him. Like he's not like there's nothing like he's not being dumb, he's not like a troublemaker, like he's not like this just because that's just how he is. Like there's a reason behind it and it's not like the way they were thinking about it.
So in my response, how the therapist basically was stating this, again, this does attach to some additional research that I picked up along the way here. Um, what's actually interesting is how many parents have never heard of play therapy in general and usually only think of play as just something that their kids do to pass the time or to enjoy themselves or even use it as a sense of reward, but not necessarily looking at it as a sense of communication. Um, I think that it's very important to note that additionally too, because in this article that I'm bringing up, it's titled Individual and Group Child Center Play Therapy, Impact on Social Emotional Skills. Um, in the results section, it actually does state that um, through like through this article that research was conducted, um, just about the number of children that were in a high risk category, such as like aggressive behavior, depressive behavior, basically all being deemed as problematic behavior um, through the use of play therapy. Um, that that behavior that was considered high risk actually did decrease by 50%. Um, and what was also shocking too was children who were in a wait list to receive, uh, not necessarily they weren't part of the play therapy, but they were on a wait list and they were kind of given some little details about it. They were only shown to uh, decrease problematic behavior by 16.6%. So, I mean, if we can't see it in the numbers that play therapy and seeing that play is a great sense of self-expression and communication, it's something that I would highly educate parents to kind of learn more about. If not, keep listening to our podcast. You know, this is something that we're going to be discussing quite often. And it's something that not only to wait to occur in a play therapy room, but maybe it could occur at home, it could occur at school, it can happen anywhere. So I just want to let parents know, like, always be vigilant, always monitor your children, but not necessarily are they being safe. What are they doing with their play? So that's just something that I would really like for parents to really consider on their drive home when they're listening to this podcast or something like that. Watch your kid, watch them have a great time, but also kind of see like, is there anything that you might want to bring up to your partner or to the family, or maybe even just ask your teacher or kid, like what's going on with them, you know, just something to consider.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing so many insight with us. Um, I definitely do want to also encourage um our listeners, parents, teachers, family members to really um do more research on child-centered play therapy alongside listening to us as well. And so um, just because there's so much information and that our podcast alone and what we talk about is not enough for you to um, completely understand the idea of child-centered play therapy.
All right, so to sum up what we talked about today in our second podcast, we discussed in detail about the dibs in search of self, and we also discussed in between with that the research that plays into child-centered play therapy and supports the benefits and outcomes of it, specifically within elementary schools. So yeah, that is our second podcast, and we will see you all next week. Thank you so much for joining us.